Citizens of the European Union's 28 member states have the right to live, work, study, or retire in any EU country. This principle is the cornerstone of EU citizenship. Citizens from other member states have the same rights as domestic ones. So, picture this. Millions of people moving freely around the EU, weaving together 28 different countries over decades. British pensioners ditching rain and grey skies for sun and sangria in Spain. A 20-something graduate from France seeking job opportunities in Germany or Sweden. No visas, no work permits, no paperwork. So, what if this were all to come undone? The UK is voting on whether it wants to remain in or leave the European Union on June 23rd, and freedom of movement is a key issue in the debate. Supporters of remaining in Europe, led by Prime Minister David Cameron, say it benefits British people who wish to study, work, and retire in Europe. They also say it enables businesses operating in the UK to fill skill gaps by easily hiring from the continent. Many British and international businesses that operate in the UK support remaining. The Leave campaign, however, says it leads to uncontrolled immigration, allowing European workers to take British jobs, depressing British wages, and putting pressure on British public services. Vote Leave has increasingly focused on immigration as its main argument for leaving the EU. The campaign was energized by this recent data. The number of EU migrants now account for about half of new arrivals in the UK. The rest come from elsewhere in the world. That number has more than doubled over the past 5 years. So with 1.2 million British expats living in other member states and 2.9 million EU citizens living in the UK, there's a lot at stake. In the event of a British exit, or Brexit, a mass deportation and repatriation of people is unlikely. But there are still a lot of unknowns. There are currently rules in place to protect EU citizens' access to pensions, healthcare, and public services. Spain, for example, is home to 300,000 British expats, more than half of which are age 55 and older. A UK government analysis on withdrawing from the EU warned that the rights of British expats to work and access pensions and healthcare in EU countries may no longer be guaranteed. It said, there would be no requirement under EU law for these rights to be maintained if the UK left the EU. Brexit campaigners have accused the government of trying to scare voters by launching what they've dubbed Project Fear. So, what's the future of free movement if the UK leaves the EU? EU membership gives the UK access to Europe's so-called single market, which allows people, goods, and services to move around as if the member states were one country, with some remaining barriers. Mr. Cameron has said that pulling out of the EU single trading market of 500 million people would be damaging for the UK economy. Pro-EU campaigners say Britain would likely have to allow free movement of EU nationals, even if the UK left the EU, if it wanted to retain access to the single market. Brexit campaigners say they would like to see controlled migration, and some have suggested the introduction of a work permit system like what applies to non-EU citizens. So, how will this play out? Polls suggest the British public is divided on the issue, so an outcome is hard to predict. British, Irish, and Commonwealth citizens who are resident in the UK and over 18 years old are eligible to vote in the referendum. EU citizens living in the UK are not, unless they're from Ireland, Cyprus, and Malta. British expats registered to vote in the UK in the last 15 years can vote too. And with nearly 5 million Brits living abroad, their vote could be decisive. Those campaigning for Britain to remain in the EU say they believe most British expats will vote to stay, as it's allowed them to more easily live and work in Europe.